I love Spider-Man. I have ever since I was a kid when I watched the 90s animated TV series religiously. It was also around that time that my older brother kind of went through a Spider-Man phase with the comics. Of course, with my older brother going through a phase of Spider-Man, that meant I was going through a phase because, well, that's what little brothers do. Now, when Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies hit theaters, I was a teen and I was absolutely blown away. While I had enjoyed Spider-Man because of his cool powers and fun villains as a kid, as a teen I began to appreciate the themes Spider-Man explores. Things like balancing obligations with relationships, sacrificing for the greater good, and of course the oft-repeated maxim that,
with great power comes great responsibility.
Now over the years there have been plenty of movies featuring Spidey, as well as a crap ton of video games. Like the films, Spidey's games have ranged from pretty darn awesome to I'm going to die! Now, Insomniac is trying to bring Spider-Man into the modern age with a fully open-world, story-driven game in the vein of the Batman Arkham games. Did they succeed? I don't know. Maybe. Marvel's Spider-Man absolutely nails the character of not only Spider-Man / Peter Parker, but also May, Miles, Otto Octavius, and Norman Osborn. And, of course, Spider-Man's love interest, the incorrigible, red-headed investigative journalist who has a knack for getting into trouble, Lois Lane. In fact, that is where the game shines, when exploring Peter's relationships with other characters. I can't say I was particularly familiar with Mr. Negative going into this game, but I can say his character was so compelling it led me to research his backstory from the comics. As far as gameplay itself goes, the game does a pretty good job. The combat is pretty similar to the combat found in the Batman Arkham games, in that it's sort of rhythm-based, you have a counter button, and you have different combos that you can do. However, it is different enough in that each of the actions are mapped to different keys, which was actually really obnoxious at the beginning because I kept wanting to press the buttons that I usually press in the Batman Arkham games. That said, that's no fault of the game, it's simply a learning curve. One thing that is very different about the combat from the Batman Arkham games is that there's no upgrade that automatically allows Spider-Man to close distances between enemies. This adds actually another surprising layer of skill to the combat. You actually have to press a dedicated button to zip to the different enemies. After you get the knack of the combat, it becomes pretty satisfying. Although, it never quite reached the levels of satisfaction I got pummeling people as the Caped Crusader. One thing that the game absolutely does incredible with is the web swinging. This is possibly one of the first open-world games where I have had no desire to use the fast travel system. Swinging is just that much fun, especially once you get the hang of it, because you start combining swinging with running on walls, with doing parkour, with doing web zips. It's an incredibly thrilling experience, and once you get the hang of it, it feels so satisfying. I actually found myself for 20 minutes not going after any missions, just swinging around the absolutely beautifully rendered New York City. Now, as far as the game missions themselves go, the story is, well, it's a little uneven. I gotta be honest, up until the end of Act 2, I was gonna give the game a solid 7.5 or 8 out of 10. The missions had gotten a little bit repetitive. It was essentially going to different places, fighting a bunch of different guys, either using stealth or just, flat out taking them on, and to be honest, it didn't seem like anything was going to jump out and surprise me. But then the end of the second act happened, and it was incredible. And then the third act happened, and it was even more incredible. The action absolutely ramps up. It's a real shame that the beginning of the game isn't quite as much of a draw as the second half of the game. Now the missions are kind of split up into a few different things. First of all, you've got the Spider-Man main story missions. And then you've got missions that you play as Mary Jane and Miles Morales. These missions were actually a nice change of pace because essentially what they require is sneaking around. I usually hate sneaking around in games, but they've equipped you with enough tools in this game to make it not so frustrating, and the checkpoints are pretty forgiving. Now the Spider-Man side missions involve things like stopping random crimes, tracking down lesser villains from the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery, and of course looking for backpacks. Now the backpacks contain knickknacks from Peter Parker's past, and some of them can be a pretty fun shout-out to fans of the comics. However, unlike the Batman Arkham games, I never felt immersed in the world of Spider-Man. Of course, that being said, it's very clear that Insomniac wanted to tell their very own story, and I have to admit, the end of the story is incredibly powerful. In fact, I don't think there's a Spider-Man movie that has quite as powerful an ending scene. I was in tears. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Look, Marvel's Spider-Man is a good game, and it's well worth your money. Unfortunately, the front end of the game is a little bit slow and a little bit repetitive with the main story missions. However, that's made up for by the end of the second act and the incredible third act of the game. Scoring this game is actually really difficult for me. It's a perfectly adequate game at the beginning that morphs into an amazing game. Oh, this is tough. Overall, the second half of the game, I'd give a 9.5 out of 10. First half, I'd give a 7.5 out of 10. So I guess I'm just going to split the difference and give it an 8.5 out of 10. I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. It's a great game. If you love Spider-Man, oh my gosh, if you love Spider-Man, you're going to like this game.